Who shot Mr. Burns? The season 7 finale of The Simpsons is the first episode of a 2-episode whodunit that asks the question, who shot Mr. Burns?
A nationwide manhunt is on to find out who gunned down Springfield's richest man. If you can solve the mystery, you could win the prize of a lifetime.
I'm gonna try and solve it. My goal is to solve the mystery before they reveal who shot him. It's a 2-episode story and each episode's about 20 minutes, so this shouldn't take long. I'm gonna check in with you guys after each commercial break and in between episodes. And I'll discuss my current theories and then lock in a pick at that point of the episode. So can I solve who shot Mr. Burns before the reveal? We'll see. Okay guys, let's get into it. Okay, we have watched up to the first commercial break. And I'm not gonna lie, I was expecting the beginning of the episode to be Mr. Burns getting shot. However, we're at the first commercial break and he's still alive. So we don't exactly have a lot to go off of yet. I did pick up on a few clues though, and we're gonna break those down. In the opening credits during the theme song, one of the sections is where Bart Simpson writes on the chalkboard. And it's usually different every episode. Well, this episode, it says, "This is not a clue." Or is it? So I'm gonna assume it's a clue. And since Bart is the one writing on the chalkboard, I'm gonna assume that it either has something to do with Bart or the school. That theory was immediately proven correct when the episode starts off in the school. We see that the pet gerbil at the school has died. And we find out that it was crushed by its own water bottle.
Ah, poor fellow. Crushed by his own water bottle.
Now, what do we know about this whodunit? We know that Mr. Burns is going to get shot at some point. And now, all of a sudden, this episode is starting off with the death of a gerbil. I do not think that that's a coincidence. I think that it's going to relate to Mr. Burns' accident as well. I believe the kids call this foreshadowing. Since the gerbil died by its own water bottle, it's safe to assume that, if this is foreshadowing, that Mr. Burns is going to get shot by his own hand, per se. And this is a theory that I believe in even more because then there's another scene where we see Mr. Burns try to booby trap someone and it doesn't work. And he says something along the lines of, "I can't make heads or tails of these booby traps." Was that a good impression? I think it was pretty good.
I can't make hide nor hair of these metric booby traps.
So my current theory is that Mr. Burns is going to try to booby trap someone, and it's going to be that booby trap that ends up shooting him. Like, I think it's going to be his own doing, and it was an accident that he hurt himself. And that will be the big reveal, right? Is that no one shot Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns shot Mr. Burns. Now, the whole premise of this episode so far is that the school has struck oil, which, sure. But the only thing that we have seen Mr. Burns be involved in with this plot point is the fact that he disguises himself as a student to try to get the school to just give him the oil. And he's quickly found out by the principal, and it seems like those two just don't get along, which would make the principal our first major suspect. But I don't know if we can really pick him as a suspect considering Mr. Burns hasn't been shot yet. So right now we have no suspects. But I do have to lock in a pick for who I think shot Mr. Burns right now during this commercial break. So I'm going to go ahead and lock in that Mr. Burns shot Mr. Burns because I do feel really good about that theory.
Simpsons Mystery Sweepstakes. Keep watching Fox for clues and don't miss the Simpsons season premiere on September 17th.
We're back for our second commercial break, and it looks like we got a lot of suspects on the board. But yes, we are at our second commercial break, and Mr. Burns is still not been shot. However, things have changed quite drastically. When I was recording the first section of this, 35 minutes ago, we didn't really have any suspects, but now we have a ton. Some might say too many. So first up, Homer is very upset with Mr. Burns because Mr. Burns doesn't know his name. And then the principal of the school is upset because Mr. Burns ended up stealing the oil. And I think both of those reasons are very solid reasons for wanting to shoot Mr. Burns. I mean, obviously, one reason is better than the other. It's just oil. But now, Bart is also in on it. You guys know Bart, because when Mr. Burns was drilling the oil, a bunch of oil shot through the air, and it ruined Bart's treehouse and caused his dog, Santa's little helper, to be put in a little doggy wheelchair. And in that moment, Bart vows for revenge. And remember, at the beginning of this episode, during the intro, Bart is the one writing on the chalkboard, this is not a clue, or is it? And we said maybe this has to do with the school or Bart. And we decided it probably has to do something with the school because the whole episode is taking place in the school for the most part. But what if it also has something to do with Bart? But we have a lot more suspects than just those three. In fact, we have a lot more suspects than just what's on the board at the moment. It's everyone who is a student and or faculty at the school. At one point, groundskeeper Willie even says that he is going to kill Mr. Burns because the money was going to go to all of the students and faculty and they all would get like one thing that they wanted. And now, because of Mr. Burns, that isn't going to happen. I mean, even Lisa, who is going to lose her music program now, says that she wants to settle his hash. Oh, and in this section, Mr. Burns doesn't know Homer's name again. Ooh, and before I forget, the people at the bar, which is this guy and this guy that owns the bar. You guys have seen The Simpsons, right? Anyway, those two are upset because now they can't be in the bar because of all of the fumes from the oil drilling. So they're all furious and everyone in the bar grabs guns. And then to add even more suspects to the list, while the oil drilling is happening, it causes an earthquake and destroys most of the town, including Grandpa Simpson's nursing home. And the final bow on this present of profane oil drilling, Mr. Burns wants to block the sun. And this is just too much for his assistant Smithers, that Smithers stands up to Mr. Burns, causing Mr. Burns to fire him. So how's that for a suspect list? It's half of the town, if not the entire town. Oh, and he hasn't even been shot yet. But since we've reached another commercial break, it's time for me to lock in another pick for who I think shot Mr. Burns. So let's go over a few of the theories that I have running through my head. Last section, I locked in that I think that Mr. Burns is going to shoot himself on accident. And that was all based on the fact that I think that the writers were foreshadowing this by using the gerbil at the beginning of this episode. And to be honest, I still don't think that really any of the suspects on this board are going to be the person who shoots Mr. Burns. It's a little too obvious. I think the guys in the bar who grabbed guns, I think those are our red herrings. I mean, it would be a bit crazy to just have it be the guys who said they were going to kill him with guns. So since it's not going to be someone super obvious, let's look at someone who is less obvious, which leads us to Bart Simpson. Now, Bart is a bigger victim than a lot of these people. I mean, he was thrown out of a treehouse and his dog is now in a wheelchair. And it would be pretty wild if, I don't even know how old Bart is, but he's a child. So it would be weird if a child shot Mr. Burns, so that could be a pretty big twist. But to be honest, I really like my Mr. Burns does it to himself on accident theory, so I think I'm going to keep that locked in for this section.
You've waited all summer long. Sunday, you'll finally learn the answer to the mystery of the century. Who shot Mr. Burns?
And just like that, we have finished episode 1, and we finally have something to work with. I know you can't see me right now because it's dark, but I just really want you to see the board here because we've added a couple suspects since the last commercial break, including the fact that Homer has now officially attacked Mr. Burns, and he gets dragged away while yelling, I'm gonna get you, Mr. Burns, or something like that. I think what he actually says is, you're a dead man, Burns. So that pretty much solidifies Homer as a red herring for me. I think the show is called The Simpsons after all, so I do think they're gonna try to make him the biggest suspect. However, I don't think that's the case. I mean, let's look at some of these other people on the board. So Grandpa Simpson actually has a gun, and he's showing it to Bart. And then Marge runs in, and she makes him, she takes the gun away because it's dangerous, and she buries it in the front yard. Now, you guys have heard of Chekhov's gun, right? I'm going to assume that since we've been introduced to Grandpa Simpson's gun, that this is going to be the gun that shoots Mr. Burns. I still have more to show you, but you can't see me, so just give me 1 second. That's better. Hey, what do you guys think of the projector? You think it's... I didn't want to waste a bunch of paper because this was going to be kind of a quicker episode than when I tried to solve Twin Peaks before the reveal. And so I was like, what if I just, use that digital media degree that I have? Okay, but there is a huge town hall meeting and everyone there is out to get Mr. Burns. And They all have guns. And during the town meeting, when everybody has their guns, we find out that Mr. Burns has his own gun. And Mr. Burns takes a little time to insult the dog that he put into a wheelchair. And the dog looks pissed. What if the dog did it? I don't think the dog did it, but it would be really funny if the dog did it. And then Mr. Burns actually blocks out the sun for the whole town. Because why not? So now, technically, everyone in town is a suspect because every single person in the town has been directly affected by Mr. Burns. Everyone's upset, and we find out that the gun that was buried in the Simpsons' front yard has been dug up. You want to know who digs in a front yard? A dog. What if the dog shot him? But I digress. We see Mr. Burns walking down an alleyway after the whole town hall meeting, and we don't see what's going on, but we hear a confrontation. And Mr. Burns audibly says, "Oh, it's you." And then we hear a bit of a struggle, and then bang. Mr. Burns has been shot. And all of the townspeople gather around to look at what just happened. And the townspeople raise their eyes, look directly into the camera as if they're looking at me. And they say, "Can you solve who did it?" Well, I'm glad you asked, residents of Springfield. Yes. Yes, I can. Yes, I will. So if this was the show Sherlock right now, I would have like a bunch of text across the screen talking about like, but in all seriousness, let's break this down. Mr. Burns says, "Oh, it's you," right before he gets shot. The whole point of this episode so far has been the fact that Homer cannot get Mr. Burns to remember his name or remember who he is. So by that logic, that means that it couldn't have been Homer who shot Mr. Burns because Mr. Burns doesn't know who Homer is. But the gun has been dug up from the Simpsons' front yard. And the only people who were there during the conversation where Marge decided to bury the gun was Grandpa Simpson, Bart, Maggie, and Marge. I think the dog might have been there too. I'm not giving up on this dog theory. So if it is this gun, the one that was buried in the Simpsons' front yard that shot Mr. Burns, then that means it would have to be one of those 4 or 5, if you count the dog, who shot Mr. Burns. Now, we don't see Grandpa or Bart during the shooting, so that gives them the availability to shoot Mr. Burns. And we know that it's not Marge because we see her. The camera's actually following her when Mr. Burns gets shot. She puts Maggie and Santa's little helper in the car, and then she's walking around looking for everyone because she can't find her family. But I have to lock in a pick. So far in this episode, during the first and second commercial breaks, we locked in the fact that Mr. Burns did it to himself. And I think that theory could still work because we do not see what happens. We only hear it, and the only voice that we hear is Mr. Burns. Whoever he's talking to does not talk. We just hear him talk, there's a struggle, and then a gun goes off. And we know that he has a gun on him, so maybe it's not the gun from the Simpsons' front yard. Maybe he gets shot with his own gun, which would go back to our gerbil theory from the beginning of this episode. So I'm going to lock in Mr. Burns doing it to himself again. Now, let's go to the next episode.
And everyone's a suspect.
But I could never shoot someone. Bill could not. Bill could not.
As far as Daddy's concerned, you're both potential murderers.
Okay, so I've started episode 2, and we are at our first commercial break. And during the intro, when Bart is writing on the chalkboard, he writes the words, "I will not complain about the solution when I hear it." So that leads me to believe that this is not going to be a serious answer. We need to go as silly as possible. It needs to be an answer that could cause people to get upset, to feel like they've been fooled or tricked. For this part, we are going to focus on the silly and funny suspects. Speaking of silly and funny suspects, we see the cops pull the 2 witnesses to the murder, Maggie and the dog, Santa's little helper. I forgot to put Santa's little helper up there. I'll do it next commercial. The cops say that they are the only 2 people, baby and dog, who witnessed Mr. Burns get shot. And then the whole joke is that, they're only 2 suspects can't speak. You know what I mean? That's the joke. But what if it's not a joke? What if it's telling us something? We know that Maggie and Santa's little helper, the dog, were right there when Mr. Burns gets shot. Maybe my joke about the dog shooting Mr. Burns is not a joke. Maybe the dog shoots Mr. Burns. But anyway, the cops think that it is Smithers who shot Mr. Burns because Smithers has become a drunk since he got fired. His life's falling apart. And he shoots someone. He remembers shooting someone, and so he confesses it in a confessional to a priest. But get this. There wasn't a priest in the confessional. It was the cops. And so they arrest him. And then, so it's like, oh, he did it. But obviously, this is a red herring because this is only the first commercial break of the second episode. We still got a while. Simpsons character Melvin Van Horn does a Sherlock Holmes cosplay and ends up proving Smithers' innocence. So now we know 100% that it was not Smithers. And we also know, just as like a group, you and me, that it is not Homer either. I think that's, and it's not Marge either. So we've narrowed it down to everyone else in the town. You know how I said Smithers does shoot someone? He shoots some dude's wooden leg, which I guess is not a crime. Oh, guys, I think we just need to focus on The Simpsons. After all, this is their show. But we've already ruled out it's not Homer, it's not Marge. So that leaves what? The kids and Grandpa. So we have Grandpa, we have Bart, we have Maggie, we have Lisa. Yeah, that's all of the, yeah. Oh, and the dog. I forgot to put the dog. See, I should have put the dog on the PowerPoint. I don't want to say Grandpa because that just feels a little too serious. It's like, oh, Grandpa lost his house, his, retirement home, and so he shot a man because of it. That just feels a little too dark and serious. We're going silly goofy, remember? I think the silliest, goofiest thing is if either Maggie, the baby, or the dog shot him. So I'm going to lock in Maggie and the dog.
Don't miss the season premiere of The Simpsons Sunday, brought to you in part by 1-800-COLLECT.
Okay, we're on the second commercial break, and don't worry, guys, the dog is officially on the conspiracy board. So when we came back from the last commercial break, everyone is like, oh, it's never the most obvious suspect, but then Lisa goes, actually, 95% of the time, it is the most obvious suspect, and the other 5% of the time, it's some random lunatic who has nothing to do with anything. And that's an interesting thing to say right when we come back from the commercial break. And so I was like, well, maybe, either it is the most obvious suspect, which I guess at this point is Homer, but we've already decided that's not the case, or maybe it's the 5%, some random lunatic who does it for no reason, who's not involved. And you want to know who's not involved and has no reason? Krusty the Clown, because Krusty has been out of town the past few weeks. And so, he hasn't been around for the whole oil fiasco. I guess he's still kind of affected by the whole blocking out the sun thing, but I don't know. I think we could be cooking, right? And then, at the beginning of during the intro, when he was like, hey, I will not be upset when I hear the solution. I mean, that would make people upset. We saw him for like 2 seconds. So that would be pretty crazy. Lisa is playing the part of the detective, and she has 4 main suspects. Moe, who owns the bar. Barney, who lives at the bar. Principal Skinner, because of the whole oil fiasco. And groundskeeper Willie. But then we knock out hella suspects because the principal has an alibi. Willie can't shoot a gun, and Moe passes a lie detector test. Now, we don't ever find out anything for Barney, so I guess that gives us like, hey, here could be a major suspect. But then we also get this song in Spanish about Mr. Burns getting shot, and in the song, I hear the word perro, which I think is Spanish for dog. So maybe they're like singing a song about Mr. Burns, and they're like, hey, by the way, we saw it, and it was the dog. The dog did it. We find out that Grandpa Simpson has his gun, the one that was buried in the front yard that we suspected maybe was used. I don't know if that makes much sense. I'm starting to think maybe none of the Simpsons shot him. Maybe it's going to be Krusty the Clown and we're going to have done all this work for no reason. Or I guess it could also be the Mr. Burns shot himself accidentally theory. That was a good theory. Maybe I need to go back to that. Side note, we get a Twin Peaks scene in this, which really caught me off guard. It kind of felt like they were mocking me. So if you don't know, if you're new to the channel, I did a Can I Solve Twin Peaks before the reveal. It's a 2-part video on my channel. And it drove me insane. So this kind of felt like The Simpsons was mocking me for having a meltdown. Anyway, the cops are now analyzing DNA evidence that they found on Mr. Burns' coat. What the DNA reader tells them is that it belongs to a Simpson. Now, I know I just said that maybe it wasn't any Simpson, and I think that this could still be the case because I mean, that is pretty vague. And we did see Homer attack him and like scuffle with him. So that could be where the hair came from or something. Following that though, Mr. Burns wakes up and yells, "Homer Simpson." So now all of the cops are after Homer, but we know that that guy doesn't know who Homer Simpson is. He has no idea who Homer Simpson is, and the person who shot him, he thought maybe that person was Homer Simpson. I mean, they do find a gun under Homer's car seat that has been fired, and the gun has Homer's fingerprints on it. And the bullets in the gun with Homer's fingerprints on it is the same type of bullet that shot Mr. Burns. I think this is a huge red herring. I do not think it was Homer. So I don't think it's Homer, but he does say Homer Simpson when he wakes up. And so here's my theory. I think this is actually pretty funny. The whole running joke, the whole episode, is the fact that Mr. Burns does not know Homer's name. So what if when Mr. Burns gets shot, he's shot by the dog, Santa's little helper, and he thinks that the dog's name is Homer? Because that kind of adds more insult. He's like, oh, I don't even know who Homer Simpson is. I thought Homer Simpson was the dog. So I'm going to lock in. Last time I locked in both Maggie and Santa's little helper. This time I'm just locking in Santa's little helper. I think the dog shot Mr. Burns. Okay, guys, so there's no more commercial breaks. So right now, I guess this should be the section where I talk about after the episode, like if I got it right. However, there's this part of the episode, Lisa just jumped in front of everyone, and she's like, wait, it's not my dad. It's not Homer. And so I'm assuming that means that we're about to get the whole breakdown of what actually happened. And so I paused it because I want to get one last chance to try to guess this. It hasn't been very long since the last commercial break. It's only been like maybe 3 minutes, but we did learn a couple of things. One is that Mr. Burns has brain damage, and that is why he yelled Homer Simpson. And not only did he just like yell Homer Simpson, the only words that he can say is Homer Simpson. I think that means that we're right that Homer didn't do it, but I think that we're wrong about it being the dog, right? Because my whole thought was like maybe he thinks that the dog's name is Homer, but he didn't say Homer Simpson's name because that's who he thought shot him. He can just only say the words Homer Simpson. We get like this little moment where we like revisit the accident, and we see Mr. Burns after he gets shot, and he's missing his gun in the holster. Since his gun is missing, that means that he was shot with his own gun. So I think after all of this time, after me guessing maybe it was Maggie, maybe it was the dog, I think I was right the first time. I think Mr. Burns accidentally shot himself with his own gun. My final guess, right before we get the reveal, is Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns shot Mr. Burns.
Tonight, Mr. Burns is shot.
Only one of the suspects.
It's the mystery people will be talking about all summer long.
This isn't Mr. Burns. It's a mask. Wait, it is Burns. His wrinkly skin looks like a mask.
Don't miss the Simpsons season finale next.
Guys, the baby shot Mr. Burns. I can't believe it was actually the baby. I was really close, man. That was so funny. So basically what happened was, I guess I was kind of right. It was kind of Mr. Burns' fault. So what happened was Mr. Burns tries to steal candy from a baby, Maggie. And in doing so, there's like a little scuffle. And Maggie gets the gun, and the gun goes off. So I think I get some points on a technicality because like it was his own fault. But also, I did say Maggie at one point. I locked her in at one point. So, did I do it? Did I solve who shot Mr. Burns before the reveal? Not really. Close. Hey, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to everyone who commented that I should try to solve this episode of The Simpsons. In the comment section of my Twin Peaks, can I solve Twin Peaks before the reveal video? Hey, if you have any other shows or movies that I should try to solve before the reveal, put them down in the comments below. Please do not put any spoilers because then that kind of ruins the whole thing and I can't do it for a video. But yeah, thank you so much. If you enjoyed this, subscribe, like it, whatever. Thanks.